What if the thing you've been blaming yourself for isn't actually your fault? What if the exhaustion you feel, the lack of motivation, the moments where you just can't make yourself keep going, what if none of that means that you're failing? Because if you're anything like the women I work with, you've probably been telling yourself a very specific story. It sounds like, I should be able to handle this. Other people are managing, why can't I? I just need to get it together. Maybe I'm just not as strong as I thought I was. Hi, I'm Jenny, and this is my weekly expert talk on procrastination and empowerment. And this week's talk is about burnout isn't a personal failure, it's a subconscious signal. So the thing is, from the outside, you don't look like someone who's struggling. You're capable, responsible, you're the one people rely on. You're the one who figures things out, who keeps things moving, who shows up even when it's hard. But on the inside, it's a very different experience. You're tired, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, deeply tired. The kind of tired that rest doesn't seem to fix. You find yourself staring at things you know you need to do and not doing them. Feeling overwhelmed by things that used to feel easy. Losing motivation for things you used to care about. Snapping, shutting down, or just feeling numb. And somewhere in all of that, a quiet thought creeps in. What's wrong with me? But what if that's the wrong question? What if there's nothing wrong with you? And what you're experiencing is actually something very intelligent. Because burnout is not a sign that you're weak. It's not a sign that you've failed. It's a signal from your subconscious that something about the way you've been living, working, and showing up is no longer sustainable. Burnout doesn't happen because you're not enough. It happens because you've been carrying too much for too long without the support you actually needed. And when you see burnout this way, everything starts to shift. Because instead of trying to fix yourself, you start to get curious about the message. Instead of pushing harder, you start to listen differently. And that's where real change begins. So if burnout isn't a personal failure, what is it actually? What is really happening beneath the surface when you feel exhausted, overwhelmed, and stuck? Because once you understand that, you stop fighting yourself and you start working with what your system is trying to tell you. So let's take this a little deeper, because when most people think about burnout, they think about being tired. They think, I just need a break. I need a holiday. I need to rest. And yes, physical exhaustion is part of it, but burnout is so much more than that. Burnout is not just about your body being tired. It's about your whole system being overwhelmed. It's emotional exhaustion. That feeling of not having anything left to give. Feeling drained by things that didn't used to affect you. Finding yourself more reactive or more shut down. It's mental overload, where everything feels like too much. Simple decisions feel hard. Your brain just won't cooperate the way it used to. And it's often a loss of connection to your motivation, to your purpose, to the things that used to matter to you. And that's the part that can feel the most confronting. Because it's not just, I'm tired. It's, I don't feel like myself anymore. And one of the most important things to understand is that burnout doesn't happen overnight. It builds quietly, gradually, through months, sometimes years, of pushing through, of saying things like, I'll just get through this week. Things will calm down soon. I just need to try a little harder. Until one day, your system says, I can't keep doing this. And this is where the subconscious piece comes in. Because burnout is not random. It's not your body failing you. It's your subconscious responding to what it's been experiencing. When your subconscious perceives that something is too much, too constant, or not aligned with what you need, it starts to withdraw energy, not to punish you, but to protect you. So the procrastination, the lack of motivation, the inability to keep pushing the way you used to, they're not signs that you've lost your drive. They're signs that your system is trying to slow you down. Because from a subconscious perspective, burnout is a signal that says this is not sustainable. Something needs to change. And when you understand that, you stop seeing burnout as something to fight and you start seeing it as something to listen to. Now, there's another piece to this that I think is really important. Burnout doesn't affect everyone in the same way. In fact, it most often affects people who are capable, responsible, high achieving, and deeply committed. People who care. People who don't give up easily. Which is why you've probably been able to keep going for as long as you have. But it's also why burnout can feel so confusing. Because you think, I've always been able to handle things. I've always pushed through before. So when that stops working, it feels like something has gone wrong. But it hasn't. It just means you've reached a point where your old way of coping is no longer sustainable. And your subconscious is asking for something different. I'm just going to have some water. Getting out of that one. Let me try this one. It's much better. And this is where things start to get really interesting because burnout isn't happening randomly. There are very specific patterns that lead to this point. And what I see over and over again is that people who burn out the most are the ones who have been doing everything right, according to the rules they've been given. So let's look at that. Let's look at why high-achieving, capable, driven women so often find themselves here. So let's talk about who burnout tends to affect the most, because it's not random. Burnout doesn't usually happen to people who don't care. It doesn't usually happen to people who disengage easily. It happens to people like you, people who are capable, responsible, reliable, driven. The ones who are known as the one who will get it done, the one we can count on, the one who handles things. And for a long time, those traits have worked for you. They've helped you build your career, earn respect, be seen as competent, and feel a sense of control. So of course, you've learned to rely on them. But here's the part that's often invisible. Those traits didn't just appear out of nowhere. They were shaped through experiences where you learned that being capable made you valuable, that being reliable made you safe, that getting things right earned approval, that letting people down didn't feel okay. So your subconscious created a pattern. If I keep performing, I'll be okay. And over time, that pattern becomes your identity. You become the person who keeps going no matter what, takes on more when others can't, pushes through when things are hard, and holds everything together. Here's the truth though. The identity comes at a cost. Because when your sense of safety is tied to being productive, being needed, being dependable, then slowing down doesn't feel neutral. It feels unsafe. Rest feels uncomfortable. Saying no feels uncomfortable. Letting something drop feels uncomfortable. Because your subconscious is saying, if we stop, what happens then? If we're not the one holding it all together, who are we? So what do? You keep going. Even when you're tired, when you're overwhelmed, when something in you is saying, this is too much. And this is where burnout begins to build. Not from one big moment, but from hundreds of small ones. Moments where you override your own needs, ignore your own limits, push past your own capacity again and again and again until eventually your system can't sustain it anymore. And here's the part that can feel really confronting. The very traits that made you successful are the same traits now driving your burnout. Your ability to push through, your commitment to doing things well, your desire to not let people down, they've been your biggest strengths. But without support, without boundaries, without awareness, they become patterns that your subconscious repeats, even when they're no longer serving you. And I want to be really clear here. This is not about taking those strengths away. It's about learning how to work with them differently so that your success doesn't come at the cost of your well-being. Because right now, what's been happening is this. You've been using effort to override what your system is telling you. You've been using discipline to push past your limits. You've been using responsibility to carry more than is sustainable. And your subconscious is responding by saying, we can't keep doing this. So at this point, a lot of people start thinking, okay, I just need to rest more, I need a break, I need time off. And rest does matter, but if the pattern underneath of all of this doesn't change, what tends to happen is something you might recognize. You finally slow down, you take a break, you try to switch off, and instead of feeling better, you feel restless, uncomfortable, even guilty. And before you know it, you're back in the same cycle. So let's look at why that happens and why burnout isn't something you can simply rest your way out of. So let's talk about something that sounds simple, but is actually a big part of why burnout keeps repeating. The idea that you just need to rest. And I want to say first that instinct is not wrong. Of course you need to rest. Of course your body and mind need a break. But here's where things get a little more complex. If burnout was only about doing too much, then rest would absolutely fix it. You'd take a weekend off, go on a holiday, switch off for a while, and come back feeling like yourself. But for the most people, that's not what happens. You rest, and maybe you feel a little better for a moment, but then something else shows up. You start to feel restless, uncomfortable, like you should be doing something. And sometimes, yes, you even feel guilty, like you haven't earned the rest, or like you're falling behind. And before long, you find yourself going back to the same patterns, pushing again, taking on too much again, overriding yourself again. And the cycle continues. So what's actually happening here? Why doesn't rest stick? Because burnout isn't just about what you're doing. It's about who you've learned to be. If your identity is, I'm the one who keeps going, I'm the one who handles everything, I'm the one people rely on, then rest doesn't feel like relief. It feels like a threat to that identity. Your subconscious is wired to keep you aligned with what feels familiar and safe. So when you slow down, it doesn't just register as rest. It can register as we're not being productive. We're not meeting expectations. We might be letting people down. And that creates discomfort. So even when you try to rest, part of you is still on high alert, still scanning, still thinking, still holding tension, which means you're not actually experiencing deep restoration. And this is why burnout can feel so confusing, because you think, I've rested, so why do I still feel this way? But the pattern underneath hasn't changed. The identity hasn't shifted. And your subconscious is still running the same program. So the cycle looks like this. You push, you exhaust yourself, you rest, you feel uncomfortable, and you go right back to pushing again, over and over again. I want to say this clearly. Rest is part of the solution. Absolutely, rest is part of the solution. But it's not the whole solution. Because if you go right back to the same patterns after you rest, you are going to end up in the same place again. So the real shift isn't just how do I rest more, it's how do I change the pattern that keeps leading me here. Because once that changes, rest actually works. It feels safe. It feels restorative. It actually gives you your energy back. Instead of just being a temporary pause before the next cycle begins. So if burnout isn't just about doing too much, and it's not something you can simply rest your way out of, then the question becomes, how do I actually shift this? How do you change something that feels so automatic, so familiar, so deeply wired into how you operate? Because this is where real change happens, not by pushing harder, and not by just stopping, but by learning how to work with your subconscious instead of constantly overriding it. So let's look at how to begin rewiring that pattern in a way that feels supportive, sustainable, and actually possible for you. So now we come to the question that really matters. How do you actually shift this? And not just in theory, but in your real life, when you are tired, busy, and used to operating the way you've always operated. Because the truth is, you don't break burnout patterns by forcing yourself to be different. You shift them by learning how to work with your subconscious instead of constantly overriding it, because that absolutely does not work. And it starts with a few simple but powerful shifts. Not big, overwhelming changes, but small adjustments that begin to rewire how you relate to yourself, your work, and your energy. So let me walk you through 4 of those shifts. So shift 1 is from pushing to listening. Most of your life, you've probably been rewarded for pushing through. Just get it done. Keep going. Don't stop now. And that becomes automatic. But burnout is often the result of pushing past what your system is trying to tell you. So the first shift is this. Instead of asking, how do I get through this? You start asking, what is this trying to tell me? And let me repeat that. What is this trying to tell me? Because beneath the exhaustion, there is information. It might be telling you this pace is not sustainable. This is not aligned with what I need. I've been carrying too much for too long. And when you start listening instead of overriding, you interrupt the pattern. Shift 2 is from overriding to supporting. Once you begin to listen, the next step is to support yourself differently. Because up until now, support has often looked like push through anyway. But real support sounds more like, what do I need right now to move forward without overwhelming myself? And sometimes that might be rest, but sometimes it's something much smaller, like taking a short pause before continuing, breaking something down into a simpler step, giving yourself permission to do less, but do it well. This isn't about doing nothing. It's about doing things in a way your subconscious doesn't resist. So shift 3 is from all or nothing to sustainable action. And this is a big one because many high achievers operate in extremes. I'm all in or I'm completely off. I'm doing everything or I'm doing nothing. And that actually creates the burnout cycle. So instead, we shift to sustainable action. Not what you can do at your absolute maximum, but what you can keep doing even on your harder days. Because consistency doesn't come from intensity. It comes from sustainability. So the question becomes, what can I do consistently without burning myself out? And that's where real momentum is built. Shift 4 is from external validation to self-trust. And this is the deeper shift underneath everything. Because for many people, their sense of self-worth has been tied to achievement, productivity, being needed, being seen as capable. So when those things are threatened, the subconscious pushes harder to maintain them. But that's also what drives burnout. So instead, we begin to shift towards self-trust, trusting that you can listen to your limits. You can make decisions that support you. You can still be valuable even when you're not pushing at full capacity. Because when you trust yourself, you don't need to prove yourself over and over again. And that reduces the pressure that fuels burnout in the first place. So I want you to take a moment here and ask yourself, and I'll repeat both of these questions. Where in my life am I still pushing instead of listening? So where in my life am I still pushing instead of listening? Where am I overriding what I need instead of supporting myself? Where am I overriding what I need instead of supporting myself? Oh, and I've got, what would sustainable action actually look like for me? What would sustainable action actually look like for me? So if you need to pause the video and take a little time to answer those questions, that's all good. Come back when you're ready. Don't stay away too long. It's very easy to get distracted and struggle to answer the questions and then not come back. So give yourself a 5-minute limit. So there's no need to change everything at once. Just notice just noticing is the beginning of rewiring. So as you begin to make these shifts, something deeper starts to change. Because the way you've been measuring success is often the very thing that's been keeping this pattern in place. If success is defined by doing more, achieving more, holding everything together, then of course you're going to keep pushing yourself to the point of burnout. So the next step is to redefine what success actually means for you now. Not based on what you've been taught, but based on what is truly sustainable. So now we come to something that sits underneath everything we've talked about. How you define success. Because whether you realize it or not, your definition of success is driving your behavior. It's shaping how much you push yourself, what you say yes to, what you feel guilty about, and how you measure your worth. And for many high achieving women, success has been defined in a very specific way. It sounds something like, I'll feel successful when I've done enough, when everything is handled, when I've achieved more, when I'm keeping up or even getting ahead. And again, this has likely worked for you to some extent. It's helped you achieve. It's helped you grow. It's helped you become the person others rely on. But here's the question I want to gently offer you. At what cost? Because if success requires you to constantly push, ignore your limits, override your needs, and keep proving yourself, then it is not sustainable. And your subconscious knows that, which is why burnout shows up. Not to stop you from succeeding, but to stop you from succeeding in a way that costs you too much. So this is where we begin to shift. We move from an external definition of success to an internal one. From how much am I doing to how am I experiencing what I'm doing? Because true success is not just about what you achieve, it's about what you can sustain. So let me offer you a different way of measuring success. Success becomes having the energy to live your life, not just get through it. Being able to show up without constantly forcing yourself. Making decisions that support you, not just everyone else. Feeling aligned with how you're living and working. it becomes less about how much can I push through and more about what can I build that I can actually keep going with. Because the truth is, you can push yourself to achieve almost anything for a period of time. But if you can't sustain it, it will eventually cost you. So success becomes sustainability. Can I keep showing up this way? Can I keep working like this? Can I keep living like this? And if the answer is no, then something needs to change. Not you, but the way you're doing things. And underneath all of this is something even deeper. Success becomes self-respect. Respecting your energy, capacity, limits, needs, not as something to push past, but as something to honour. Because when you respect yourself, you don't need burnout to force you to stop. You can choose differently before you reach that point. So I want you to take a moment here and ask yourself, what has success meant to me up until now? What has success meant to me up until now? And is that definition actually supporting me? And is that definition actually supporting me? So take a moment to have a think about those questions. And if you need to, pause the video and spend a few minutes, maybe 5 at the maximum, and have a think about those questions to see where you are at the moment. So I've got one more question for you. What would success look like if it included my well-being? So what would success look like if it included my well-being? And that's a really important question to think about, because that's the change you need to be making. Because that version of success is the one your life can actually hold. And when you begin to redefine success in this way, something deeper shifts, because you're no longer trying to be the person who holds everything together at any cost, pushes through no matter what, measures their worth by how much you can do. You begin to step into a different identity. So before we finish, I want to just take a moment and have you noticed what shifted for you? Because you didn't just sit here and learn something, you recognize something. Maybe for the first time, you saw that what you've been experiencing isn't failure. It's not weakness. It's not a sign that you're not capable of handling more. It's a signal, a very intelligent signal from a part of you that has been trying to get your attention for a long time. And when you really let that in, something begins to change, because you are no longer the person who is not coping, falling behind, needing to try harder. You are someone who has been carrying too much for too long in a way that was never sustainable. And now you have a different way of seeing it, which means a different version of you becomes available. Not the version who pushes through everything at the expense of herself, but the version who listens, responds, supports yourself, and builds your life in a way you can actually sustain. This version of you, who doesn't wait for burnout to force a change, because you know how to make that change yourself. And this is the identity shift from I just need to get it together to I need to listen differently. From I have to keep pushing to I can build this in a way that supports me. From success means doing more to success means creating something I can actually live with. And when you begin to live from that place, burnout is no longer something that controls you. It becomes something that guides you. So I want to leave you with one question. What would it look like to build your life and your work without abandoning yourself in the process? So let me repeat that. What would it look like to build your life and your work without abandoning yourself in the process? Because that version of your life is not something you have to earn. It's something you can start creating from here. And if you're listening to this and something in you is saying, this makes sense, but I don't know how to do this on my own, that's exactly the work I do. I support women who are capable, driven, and used to pushing through to step out of the cycle of burnout and into a way of living and working that actually supports them. Not by doing more, but by changing the pattern underneath it. So if you're ready to explore this more deeply, I'd love to invite you to take the next step with me with the Courageous Pathway program. And this is where we take everything we've talked about today and actually apply it to your life, your patterns, and your day-to-day experience. So this doesn't just stay as something you understand, it becomes something you live. And there's no pressure, just an opportunity to start creating a different relationship with yourself and a different way of moving through your life. So it was never that you weren't enough. You were just trying to carry too much in a way that wasn't designed to support you. Now you have a different way, and you get to decide what comes next. Thank you for coming along and listening today, and I hope you got a lot out of that.